Stop. Look closely at this man. You see a dirty, disheveled homeless veteran, don't you? A nobody meant to be ignored. That's exactly what everyone else saw too. But the exhausted waitress standing next to him didn't see a bum, she saw a human being worthy of respect. And that single, split-second choice triggered a life-changing chain reaction that absolutely no one could have predicted. In a world obsessed with status, what happens when a rich man-poor woman dynamic flips upside down in the blink of an eye? We live in a cynical time, don't we? A time where kindness is often mistaken for weakness, and we scroll past the suffering, hardened by a society that values the wallet over the soul. It's a painful truth, that nagging fear that compassion is a dying art. But Ava Collins is about to prove the world wrong. She's broke, tired, and barely holding on, yet she's about to face a kindness test that could cost her everything she has left. This isn't just another heartwarming story, it's a collision of destiny. Caleb Foster walks into her diner, looking for a meal but truly hungry for something much rarer: integrity. What Ava doesn't know is that the man she's serving holds the keys to her future. But before the redemption, there is the fall. Prepare yourself, because this social experiment takes a dark, shocking turn before the light finally breaks through. You are about to witness an injustice so raw it will make your blood boil, followed by a plot twist so satisfying it might just be the tearjerker of the year. Ava is about to be humiliated for doing the right thing. Her livelihood is on the line. The stakes. Her dream of a college tuition versus the crushing cruelty of a judgmental manager. Will karma strike in time to save her? Before we dive into this unbelievable journey of generosity and the ultimate reward, I need you to make a commitment to the good side of the internet. If you believe that one act of kindness can change the world, smash that like button right now. Hit subscribe to join our community of truth seekers, and turn on notifications. Let's prove that goodness still wins. Ready? Let's watch Ava Collins get rewarded. The heavy, suffocating scent of frying grease and stale coffee hung in the air, clinging to Ava Collins like a second skin she desperately wanted to shed. It was the 12th hour of a grueling double shift at the city's most pretentious diner, a place where the clientele's net worth was often higher than their empathy levels. Her feet throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache that seemed to echo the pounding of her own heart, a constant reminder of the physical toll her life demanded. Every muscle in her back screamed for rest, for just a moment to sit down and breathe, but the dinner rush was unforgiving, a relentless tide of orders and demands. She moved through the crowded room with a practiced efficiency, balancing heavy trays and navigating the narrow aisles, her smile a carefully constructed mask hiding her utter exhaustion. It wasn't just physical fatigue, it was a soul-deep weariness born from carrying the weight of the world on narrow shoulders. In the back of her mind, amidst the cacophony of clattering silverware and demanding voices, a singular, shining dream kept her moving forward, one step at a time. She wasn't just a waitress, she was a student, a dreamer fighting tooth and nail for a future that seemed to drift further away with every unpaid bill. The vision of her college tuition being paid in full was the fuel that kept her going when her body wanted to collapse, a beacon of hope in the gray fog of her daily grind. She would often catch herself staring blankly at the wall, imagining the feel of a diploma in her hands, the symbol of a life where she didn't have to count pennies for a loaf of bread. But then, a sharp snap of fingers from an impatient customer would jerk her back to the harsh reality of the diner floor. It was a brutal cycle, a constant battle between the vibrant promise of tomorrow and the crushing weight of today. Ava paused for a fleeting second near the kitchen pass, closing her eyes and taking a deep, steadying breath, trying to center herself before heading back into the fray. The noise of the kitchen was deafening, a chaotic symphony of shouting cooks and sizzling pans, but in that micro-moment, she found a tiny island of silence. She knew she was on the edge, teetering dangerously close to burnout, but she also knew she didn't have the luxury of falling apart, not when so much was at stake. Her bank account was hovering near zero, a terrifying reality that kept her awake at night, staring at the ceiling and doing frantic mental math. Every tip, every stray dollar bill left on a table, was a lifeline, a tiny piece of the puzzle she was desperately trying to solve before the semester began. She tightened her apron strings, a symbolic gesture of girding herself for battle, and pushed through the swinging doors once more. The diner was packed with the city's elite, men in tailored suits and women dripping in jewelry, people who had never known the gnawing anxiety of an empty fridge. To them, Ava was invisible, a moving fixture designed to serve their needs and then disappear into the background, a ghost in a uniform. They didn't see the dark circles under her eyes or the way her hands trembled slightly when she poured the water. They only saw a vessel for their food. It was a strange, isolating feeling, to be surrounded by so many people yet feel completely and utterly alone in her struggle. This social experiment of existence often felt rigged against her, a game where the rules were written by those who had never had to play by them. Yet, she maintained her grace, refusing to let their indifference erode her dignity, holding her head high even as her spirit flagged. She approached a table of 4, forcing a brightness into her voice that she didn't feel, reciting the specials with a cheerfulness that felt like a lie. The customers barely acknowledged her presence, continuing their conversation without missing a beat, treating her interruption as a minor annoyance. It was moments like these that tested her resolve the most, the casual dehumanization that came with the job, the feeling of being less than. But Ava had a core of steel beneath her soft exterior, a resilience forged in the fires of hardship and necessity. She reminded herself that this was temporary, a stepping stone on the path to something greater, a necessary sacrifice for the life she was building. She took their orders, her pen moving quickly across the pad, ignoring the dismissive wave of a hand that sent her away. As she walked back to the computer terminal to punch in the order, a wave of dizziness washed over her, the room spinning slightly before writing itself. She gripped the counter, her knuckles turning white, forcing her vision to clear and her legs to steady themselves. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, a meager piece of toast that seemed like a lifetime ago, and her body was running on fumes and sheer willpower. It was a dangerous game she was playing, pushing herself to the limit day after day, gambling her health for a shot at education. But what choice did she have in a system where opportunity came with a price tag she couldn't afford? She swallowed the nausea, took a sip of lukewarm water from a hidden glass, and steeled herself for the next round.
The night was far from over, and the promise of rest was still hours away, a distant shore she had to swim towards through a sea of exhaustion. She looked out the window at the darkening street, wondering if anyone out there understood the silent battles being fought behind the smiling faces of the service industry. It was a lonely war, fought in the trenches of diners and retail stores, by people like her who were just trying to survive. But little did she know, the universe was about to shift on its axis, bringing a challenge that would test not just her endurance, but the very essence of who she was. The door was about to open, and with it, the winds of destiny would blow into her life, changing everything forever. The heavy glass door of the diner swung open with slow, hesitant creak, admitting a gust of cold wind and a figure that immediately silenced the nearby tables. Caleb Foster stepped across the threshold, a stark anomaly in the polished, glittering world of the high-end establishment, a smudge of gray on a canvas of gold. He looked like a man defeated by life, his clothes worn and layered against the chill, his face obscured by a rough, unkempt beard that spoke of months on the streets. He was a picture of a homeless veteran, a ghost from a world these wealthy patrons tried desperately to ignore, a living reminder of the cracks in their perfect society. The air in the room seemed to shift, growing tense and heavy with unspoken judgment, as eyes turned towards him with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Caleb stood there for a moment, blinking against the harsh lights, his posture stoic but his eyes betraying a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. He clutched a battered backpack to his chest as if it contained all his worldly possessions, a shield against the hostile gazes that were already dissecting him. He didn't look like he belonged here, in fact. He looked like he had wandered into a hostile alien landscape, where he was an intruder. The contrast was jarring, the pristine white tablecloths and the gleaming silverware versus his muddy boots and frayed jacket. It was a classic rich man, poor woman setup, but flipped and twisted into a tableau of societal rejection. The murmurs began almost instantly. Low whispers behind raised hands, ripples of discomfort spreading through the dining room like a virus. He took a few tentative steps forward, his eyes scanning the room not for a friendly facade, likely didn't expect one, but simply for a place to rest his weary bones. The hostility radiating from the patrons was palpable, a physical force pushing against him, tried to eject him before he could even speak. A woman at a nearby booth pulled her designer handbag closer to her, a reflex of fear and prejudice that didn't go unnoticed by the silent observer. A man in a sharp suit openly sneered, turning his back with an exaggerated gesture of disgust, signaling his rejection of Caleb's presence. This wasn't just about a meal, it was a collision of worlds, a moment where the comfortable bubble of the elite was threatened by the intrusion of reality. Caleb seemed accustomed to this reaction, his face an unreadable mask of resignation, as if he had walked this gauntlet 1,000 times before. He didn't shrink away, nor did he puff out his chest in defiance. He simply existed, a quiet monument to survival in a world that wanted him erased. There was a dignity in his silence, a heavy, grounded presence that commanded attention even as it drew scorn. He looked around for a host or a server, someone to acknowledge his humanity. But the staff seemed frozen, unsure of how to handle this unexpected breach of protocol. The silence stretched, becoming awkward and thick, a tension that threatened to snap at any moment. From the corner of the room, the manager watched with hawk-like eyes, his face twisting into a scowl of irritation at the disruption to his carefully curated atmosphere. The patrons were his priority, their comfort his currency, and Caleb was a liability, a stain on the pristine image of the restaurant. The air crackled with the unsaid accusations. You don't belong here. You can't afford this. You are unwanted. It was a cruel, silent chorus that Caleb had likely heard in every city, on every street corner, a soundtrack to his life on the margins. Yet, he stood his ground, a silent question mark in the middle of their declarative sentences of wealth and status. His gaze finally landed on an empty table in the back, a small, secluded spot near the kitchen doors, far away from the glittering chandeliers and the judgmental eyes. It was the reject table, the place where they put the people they wanted to hide, but to Caleb, it probably looked like a sanctuary. He made a small movement towards it, a hopeful step, but the atmosphere in the room tightened, a collective inhalation of breath as if daring him to proceed. The rejection was almost physical, a wall of psychic energy blocking his path, built brick by the prejudice of the crowd. He paused, looking around, perhaps waiting for permission, or perhaps just waiting for the inevitable ejection. At that moment, the tragedy of the situation was laid bare. A man who had likely served his country, who had once had dreams and a life, now reduced to a pariah in search of a warm meal. It was a scene ripe for a tearjerker story, but in real time, it was just uncomfortable, raw, and deeply unfair. The wealthy patrons returned to their meals, try and pretend he didn't exist, but the tension lingered, a sour note in their symphony of excess. Caleb stood alone, an island of need in a sea of plenty, waiting for someone, anyone, to bridge the gap. The manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, whose suit was as sharp as his tongue, stormed out from behind the podium like a bull seeing red. He was a man who measured worth in credit limits and appearance, and Caleb failed every single metric he held dear. His face was flushed with indignation, his eyes narrowing as he zeroed in on a disheveled figure standing in his lobby. He didn't see a person, he saw a problem, a disruption to the revenue stream, a blot on the landscape that needed to be scrubbed away immediately. He snapped his fingers at Ava, who was passing by with a tray of water, his voice a harsh whisper that cut through the ambient noise like a knife. "Ava, get over here. Now." Ava froze, the tray trembling slightly in her hands, her stomach dropping as she recognized the tone of voice that usually preceded a reprimand. She hurried over, her eyes darting nervously between her furious boss and the silent, stoic figure Caleb. Mr. Henderson didn't waste time with pleasantries. He pointed a manicured finger at Caleb, his lip curling in a sneer of pure, elitist disgust. "Get rid of him," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "We don't serve his kind here. He's scaring the customers. Look at him. He probably smells like a dump. Kick him out, Ava, immediately." The order hung in the air, cruel and absolute, a direct command to strip another human being of their dignity for crime of being poor. Ava looked at Caleb, really looked at him, and saw not a monster, but a man with eyes that held a universe of sadness. She felt a surge of nausea, a rebellion rising in her gut against the sheer inhumanity of the request. "But sir," She stammered, her voice low, trying to appeal to a shred of decency she hoped existed somewhere in Henderson's heart. He hasn't done anything. He's just standing there. Maybe he's hungry. Her words trailed off as Henderson's eyes flashed with dangerous anger. I don't pay you to think. Collins. I pay you to keep this place respectable. Henderson spat back, looming over her, using his physical presence to intimidate. If you want to run a charity, do it on your own time. Right now. You are on my clock, and I am telling you to escort that Vegan out the door before he ruins the dinner rush. Do it, or don't bother coming back for your next shift. The threat was explicit, a weaponization of her poverty against her morality. He knew she needed this job, he knew about her tuition struggles, and he was using that leverage to force her hand. It was a classic kindness test, brutal and unfair, placing Ava in an impossible dilemma between her livelihood and her conscience. The other servers watched from the shadows, eyes wide, thankful it wasn't them in a line of fire, but doing nothing to intervene. The silence from her co-workers was deafening, a collective act of cowardice that left Ava isolated on an island of moral choice. Henderson crossed his arms, tapping his foot impatiently, waiting for her to obey, confident that her financial desperation would outweigh her principles. He viewed Caleb as trash and Ava as a tool, both disposable in his pursuit of profit. Would you have the courage to say no? It's easy to judge from the safety of screen, but standing there, with rent due and tuition looming, the pressure was crushing. Ava looked at the exit, then back at Caleb, who seemed to shrink under the weight of the unwanted attention, turning to leave to save her the trouble. He knew the drill, he knew he wasn't wanted. Seeing his resignation, something inside Ava snapped not broken, but solidified. The fear of losing her job was suddenly eclipsed by the fear of losing her soul. She looked Mr. Henderson in the eye, her hand shaking but her voice steadying. He's a customer, she said, more to herself than to him. The manager's face turned a shade of purple, mouth opening to unleash a torrent of abuse. But Ava had already turned away. She wasn't walking towards the door to open it for Caleb's exit. She was walking towards him to welcome him in. It was a moment of quiet rebellion, a refusal to be complicit in the cruelty of the world. She was risking everything, but as she looked at the homeless veteran, she knew she couldn't live with herself if she didn't. Defying the laser-focused glare of her boss burning into her back, Ava approached Caleb not with the authority of a bouncer, but with the grace of a hostess welcoming a VIP. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, adrenaline flooding her system as she crossed the invisible line of insubordination. She caught Caleb's eye just as he was turning to the door, his hand reaching for the handle, ready to retreat back into the cold night. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, her voice soft but clear, cutting to the murmur of the dining room. Caleb froze, his shoulders hunching slightly as if expecting a blow or an insult, the reflex of a man used to being kicked while he was down. When he turned, he didn't see a scowl, he saw a warm, genuine smile that seemed to light up the dimly lit space between them. "I have a perfect table for you," Ava said, gesturing gently toward the quiet booth in the corner, far enough from the staring eyes to offer privacy, but central enough to show he was welcome. The shock on Caleb's face was heartbreaking as eyes widened, scanning her face with mockery, the trick, the hidden camera. But there was only kindness, pure and unadulterated. He hesitated, looking at his dirty boots, then at the pristine floor, whispering, "Miss, I don't want to cause any trouble. I can just go." "You're not causing any trouble," Ava insisted, stepping closer, her presence a shield against the room's hostility. "Please, you look cold. Come sit down." She didn't wait for an answer, leading the way with a confidence she didn't feel, forcing him to either follow or rudely reject her offer. It was a masterful social maneuver, using the norms of politeness to subvert the norms of exclusion. Caleb, seemingly stunned by this unexpected turn of destiny, slowly followed her, his footsteps heavy and hesitant, moving like a sleepwalker in a dream he feared waking from. As she seated him, she made a show of snapping the cloth napkin and placing it gently on his lap, treating him with the same reverence she would show a CEO or a celebrity. She handed him a menu, not the tattered lunch menu, but the heavy, leather-bound dinner menu, placing it in his rough, callus-covered hands. "Take your time," she said, pouring him a glass of water, the ice clinking cheerfully in the silence. "The pot roast is really good tonight, if you want something warm." She spoke to him like a human being, a radical act in a room determined to treat him as a nuisance. The nearby patrons watched in stunned silence, some whispering indignantly, others looking away in shame, unable to hold the mirror Ava was holding up to their own behavior. Mr. Henderson was fuming by the kitchen station, his knuckles white as he gripped the tray, but he didn't cause a scene right there, perhaps fearing the optics of dragging a man out who was already seated. Ava had bought Caleb a reprieve, a pocket of time and space where he could just be. She stood by the table for a moment longer than necessary, a sentinel ensuring he settled in, her smile never wavering despite the terror of unemployment looming over her. "Thank you," Caleb rasped, his voice rusty from disuse, looking up at her with an intensity that pierced her soul. It wasn't just a thank you for the seat, it was gratitude for the acknowledgement of his existence. Ava nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "My name is Ava," she said. "I'll be taking care of you tonight." In that simple introduction, she bridged the chasm between rich man, poor womaner in this context, the employed and the destitute, creating a connection based on humanity rather than status. She walked away from the table feeling lighter. Despite the danger she was in, every step back to the kitchen was a step into the lion's den. But for the first time in her shift, her feet didn't hurt as much. She had done the right thing. She had passed the test she didn't know she was taking. But the night was far from over, and the consequences of her defiance were gathering like storm clouds on the horizon, ready to break. Caleb sat in the booth, his posture stiff and guarded, a fortress of solitude amidst the clinking glasses and low hum of conversation. He didn't immediately open the menu instead. His eyes darted around the perimeter, scanning for threats, a habit ingrained from years of living on the edge. He was silent, almost unnervingly so, offering no small talk, no smiles, just a watchful intensity that would have unnerved a lesser server. To the casual observer, he might have seemed ungrateful or rude, a difficult customer testing the patience of the staff. But Ava saw past the wall he had erected. She saw the defensive crouch of a man, waiting for the other shoe to drop. She returned to his table frequently, refilling his water, offering bread, checking in with a gentleness that never wavered in the face of his stoicism. He tested her patience, perhaps unconsciously, by taking a long time to order, by mumbling his responses, by avoiding eye contact. In the high-pressure environment of a busy diner, a slow table is a curse, a drain on tips and time. But Ava slowed her own rhythm to match his, refusing to rush him, refusing to let the frantic pace of the restaurant bleed into his sanctuary. She treated him with the dignity of a king, answering his gruff questions with polite, complete sentences, never letting a hint of annoyance creep into her tone. "I'm not sure what I can. What I want," Caleb mumbled, staring at the prices, his brow furrowed. The numbers on the page were likely astronomical compared to what he had in his pocket, a reality that seemed to make him shrink further into his seat. Ava sensed his anxiety immediately. "The soup of the day is hearty vegetable," she suggested softly, crouching down slightly to be at his eye level, breaking the power dynamic of server-customer. "It comes with extra bread. It's on the house for our first-time guests." It was a white lie, a small act of generosity to ease his burden without stripping his pride. Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, searching for the pity he despised. But he found only respect. He nodded slowly, an almost imperceptible dip of his chin. "That sounds fine," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Ava didn't just walk away, she gave him a nod of affirmation. "Coming right up, Caleb." She used his name. She must have overheard him or just assumed. Or perhaps he whispered Itankering him to present, validating his identity. Throughout the meal, while other tables demanded her attention with snapping fingers and rude complaints about steak temperatures, Ava prioritized a silent man in the corner. She brought him extra butter. She ensured his coffee was piping hot. She shielded him from the glares of the manager who prowled the floor like a shark. It was a heartwarming story unfolding in real time, invisible to most, but monumental in its impact. She was weaving a cocoon of safety around him, using her service as a form of protection. At one point, Caleb dropped his fork, the metal clattering loudly on the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet dining room. Heads turned. Mr. Henderson started marching over, ready to pounce. Ava intercepted the moment instantly, swooping in with a fresh fork before Caleb could even bend down. Slippery little things, aren't they? She joked lightly, diffusing the tension, drawing the attention to herself and away from his clumsiness. She took the blame, she took the heat, and she kept his dignity intact. By the time he finished his soup, the lines on Caleb's face seemed to have softened. Just a fraction. The fortress was lowering its drawbridge. He was still silent, still guarded, but he was eating. He was present. Ava's patience wasn't just good customer service. It was a lifeline thrown into the dark waters of his isolation. She didn't know who he was or what he had been through, but she knew that for tonight, he was her responsibility, and she would not fail him. The meal was finished, the plate wiped clean with the last piece of bread, a testament to a hunger that went deep. Ava approached the table with the check tucked discreetly in her apron, not wanting to rush him out, but knowing the restaurant policy required it. As she began to clear the table, asking if he needed anything else, Caleb's hand went to his pocket, patting the worn fabric of his jacket. Then he patted the other pocket, then his pants. His movements grew frantic, his eyes widening in a dawn of panic that was painful to watch. He froze, his face draining of color beneath the grime, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. His voice cracked, the silence of the last hour breaking into a jagged shard of distress. My wallet. I had it. I swear. He looked up at Ava, terror in his eyes. For a man who had faced war in the streets, the shame of being unable to pay for a meal he had already eaten seemed to be the ultimate defeat. He began to stand up, patting himself down again, turning his pockets inside out, revealing nothing but lint and emptiness. I must have dropped it. Outside. I can go look. It'll come back. It was the oldest line in the book, a line every server had heard 1,000 times from scammers and Indian dashers. Across the room, Mr. Henderson saw the commotion, a predator sensing weakness. He began to move toward them, a triumphant, malicious gleam in his eye. He had been waiting for this. He knew it. This was his moment to prove he was right, to humiliate Ava and throw the vagrant out. Caleb saw the manager approaching and shrank back, his hands trembling. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." He looked ready to accept his fate, the shouting, the police, the humiliation. It was a shocking low point, the universe seemingly punishing him for daring to step inside. But before Henderson could arrive, before the first accusation could be hurled, Ava made a split-second decision that would define her character forever. She reached into her own pocket, her fingers brushing against the crumpled bills of her night's tips money. She needed for rent, for books, for food. Without hesitation, she pulled out a $20 bill and slammed it down on the table, covering the check. "It's taken care of," she said, her voice loud enough for Henderson to hear as he arrived at the table. The manager stopped, confused, looking from the cash to Ava to Caleb. "What is this?" he demanded. "He forgot his wallet," Ava said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "In paying for his meal. It's paid. He's a customer who paid." She stared her boss down, challenging him to refuse her money. It was her earnings, her sacrifice. She was effectively paying for the privilege of serving him, wiping out hours of hard labor in seconds. Caleb looked at the money, then at Ava, stunned. You can't," he stammered. "That's your..." "It's fine," Ava interrupted gently, turning her back to the manager to focus on Caleb. "Consider it my treat. Everyone forgets things sometimes." She didn't shame him. She didn't lecture him. She simply solved the problem, absorbing the cost of his mistake into her own fragile budget. It was an act of reckless generosity that made no financial sense, but perfect moral sense. Henderson scoffed, snatching the bill from the table. "Fine," he sneered, "but don't expect to keep those tips, Collins. You're throwing your money away on trash." He stalked off, deprived of his public execution, but satisfied that Ava had lost money. Ava didn't care. She looked at Caleb, who was staring at her as if she were an angel made of flesh and blood. "Thank you," he choked out, tears welling in his eyes. "You don't know what this means." She smiled a sad, tired smile. "I think I do," she said. She had saved him from humiliation, but the night had cost her more than she could afford. With the crisis averted and the bills settled, the tension at the table dissolved into a quiet intimacy. Caleb didn't rush to leave. Perhaps he was too shaken, or perhaps he sensed that Ava needed a moment too. The restaurant had lulled into a temporary quiet spell, and Ava lingered by his booth, ostensibly refilling his water, but really just seeking a human connection. "I'm sorry about my boss," she murmured, leaning against the booth divider, her guard coming down for the first time that night. "He forgets what it's like to be human sometimes." Caleb nodded slowly, his hands wrapped around the warm coffee mug. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "That was your money." Ava shrugged, a gesture of feigned indifference. "Money comes and goes," she said, though the lie tasted bitter. "Kindness, that's harder to come by." She looked out the window, her fatigue suddenly visible. "Besides, I know what it's like to be one bad day away from losing everything. I'm barely keeping my head above water as it is." For the first time, Ava opened up. Maybe it was because he was a stranger, maybe because he had seen her at her most vulnerable, defending him. She told him about the college tuition that was looming over her like a storm cloud. She spoke of the double shifts, the textbooks she couldn't afford, the dream of becoming a nurse so she could help people, a dream that felt impossibly expensive. "I'm fighting for every credit," she admitted, a wry smile on her lips. "Some days, like today, I wonder if it's worth it, if I'm just fooling myself thinking a girl like me can make it." Caleb listened with an intensity that was rare. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply absorbed her story, his eyes sharp and attentive. He was a millionaire in disguise, the rich man hidden beneath rags, hearing the raw, unfiltered truth of her struggle. She had no idea she was confessing her financial woes to a man who could buy the entire block. To her, he was just a fellow traveler on a hard road, someone who understood the language of struggle. "You have a good heart, Ava," Caleb said quietly. "That's worth more than any degree." Ava laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Try telling that to the bursar's office. They don't accept good hearts as payment." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "But he'll figure out. I always do. I just have to work a few more doubles, maybe skip a few meals myself." The irony was crushing. She had just paid for his meal while admitting she might have to skip her own. Caleb's expression tightened, a muscle in his jaw jumping. He looked down at his hands, perhaps wrestling with the urge to reveal himself right then and there. But he held back. The social experiment, or rather, his test of integrity, wasn't over. He needed to see the full picture. He needed to know if this kindness was a fluke or the bedrock of her character. "You're going to be a great nurse," he said finally. "The world needs more people who care like you do." "Thanks, Caleb," she said, pushing off the booth to head back to work. "I hope so." She walked away, leaving him with his thoughts. She had shared her burden, unaware that she had just handed the map of her dreams to the one person who could make them reality. It was a moment of pure, tragic, dramatic irony, setting the stage for the unbelievable events to follow. As Ava moved away from Caleb's table, the bubble of connection popped, replaced by the stinging reality of her workplace environment. She walked into the server station to grab a pitcher of water and was immediately met with a wall of giggles and whispered insults. Two other waitresses, Sarah and Jessica, were huddled in the corner, watching her with amused contempt. They were the type who laughed at the misfortune of others, who saw kindness as a weakness to be exploited or mocked. To them, Ava's interaction with the homeless veteran was pathetic, a waste of time that could have been spent flirting with the high tippers in the VIP section. "Look, it's Mother Teresa," Sarah snickered, loud enough for Ava to hear. "Hey, Ava, did you get his number? Maybe he can take you back to his cardboard box." The cruelty was sharp and juvenile, but it stung nonetheless. Jessica chimed in, applying fresh lip gloss while looking at Ava's reflection in the mirror. "Seriously, Ava, it's embarrassing. You're making us all look bad, catering to nobody like that. Mr. Henderson is furious. You know, you're literally paying to work here tonight." Ava gripped the pitcher handle, her knuckles turning white. She wanted to scream, to tell them that the nobody had more dignity in his little finger than they had in their entire bodies. But she held her tongue. She was already on thin ice. "He's a human being," Ava muttered, keeping her eyes down. "He was hungry." This only provoked more laughter. "Oh!" "Boo-hoo," Sarah mocked. "Save the sob story for someone who cares. You're wasting your tables. I bet table 4 is waiting for refills while you play savior." The peer pressure was suffocating. It wasn't just a manager, it was the culture of the place. A toxic stew of elitism, where value was determined solely by the thickness of a wallet. Ava felt a wave of humiliated heat rise up her neck. She began to question herself. Was she being stupid? Was she ruining her own chances for a stranger? The mockery deepened her isolation. She felt like an alien in her own job, surrounded by people who spoke a different language, a language of selfishness. "You're going to get fired, you know," Jessica added casually, turning to leave the station. "And for what? A guy who probably doesn't even remember his own name?" They breezed past her, smelling of expensive perfume and arrogance, leaving Ava standing alone in the narrow hallway. The words echoed in her head. Nobody. Wasting time. Fired. She looked back out at the dining room. Caleb was still there, sitting quietly. He looked small and fragile against the backdrop of luxury. The mockery of the waitresses made her protective instinct flare up again, but it was mixed with fear. She was alone in this. Absolutely alone. The life lesson here seemed to be that kindness was a punishable offense. Ava took a deep breath, forcing the tears back. She wouldn't let them see her cry. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She straightened her apron and marched back out, head high, refusing to let their poison infect her heart. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted, and the night was about to take an even darker turn. The inevitable explosion finally happened. Mr. Henderson, having stewed in his office for 20 minutes, decided that enough was enough. He had been watching on the security cameras, seeing Ava chat with Caleb, seeing the other waitresses gossip. He marched onto the floor, his face a mask of cold, calculated fury. He didn't call Ava to the back this time. He wanted an audience. He wanted to make an example of her. He intercepted her right in the middle of the dining room, halfway between the kitchen and Caleb's table, stopping her in her tracks with a raised hand. "That's it, Collins," he boomed, his voice carrying over the music and the chatter. The entire restaurant went silent. Forks paused midair. "I've watched you fawn over that vagrant all night while paying customers wait. You've ignored my direct orders. You've disrupted the atmosphere of this establishment." He was shouting now, performing for the wealthy patrons, showing them he was protecting their sanctuary from riffraff and the incompetent staff. Ava stood frozen, the blood draining from her face. "Sir, please, can we talk about this in the back?" She pleaded, her voice trembling. She could feel the eyes of every person in the room on her, the judgment, the pity, the amusement. But Henderson was on a power trip. "No, we will not talk in the back," he declared. "You're fired. Get out, now, and take your charity case with you." He pointed a shaking finger at Caleb, then back at Ava. It was a public execution of her livelihood, fired on the spot. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Ava felt her world crumbling. The tuition, the rent, the food gone, all because she served soup to a hungry man. The injustice of it was so sharp it felt like a physical wound. She looked at Henderson, seeing the malicious glee in his eyes. He enjoyed this. He enjoyed crushing her. Caleb stood up at his table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice finding a new strength. "Leave her alone. She didn't do anything wrong." But Henderson just laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound. "Shut up, you bum. You're trespassing. Get out before I call the cops on both of you." He turned back to Ava. "Hand over your apron. You're done." Slowly, with shaking hands, Ava reached behind her back and untied her apron. The symbol of her service, her employment, fell to the floor. She felt naked, exposed, utterly humiliated. Tears finally spilled over, hot and fast, blurring her vision. She had tried so hard. She had done everything right by the laws of humanity, and everything wrong by the laws of capitalism. She looked at Caleb one last time. He looked devastated, his face a portrait of guilt. He stepped forward, but she shook her head, unable to speak. She couldn't bear to look at him, the source of her ruin, even though she knew it wasn't his fault. It was the system. It was the cruelty of men like Henderson. One word for this manager? Tyrant doesn't even begin to cover it. Ava turned and ran, fleeing to the front door, the bell chiming cheerfully as she exited her life as she knew it. The cold night air hit Ava like a slap in the face as she burst out of the diner, her tears blinding her to the city lights. She didn't stop running until she was blocks away, collapsing onto a bus stop bench, her breath coming in ragged, sobbing gasps. The adrenaline of the confrontation faded, replaced by a cold, hollow dread. She was unemployed. She had 40 to her name. Rent was due in 3 days. The realization settled over her like a heavy, wet blanket. Her kindness had cost her everything. The karma she believed in seemed to be broken, or worse, inverted. Back at the diner, Caleb watched her run, his fists clenched at his sides. He looked at Henderson, who was smugly adjusting his tie, satisfied with his night's work. The patrons returned to their meals. The show over, the unpleasantness removed. Caleb didn't say a word to the manager. He didn't scream or fight. He simply looked at him with an expression of such profound, icy judgment that Henderson actually flinched, stepping back. Caleb turned and walked out the door, leaving his backpack behind, vanishing into the shadows of the street, as if he had never been there. Ava sat on the bench for an hour, shivering in her thin uniform shirt. She replayed the night in her head, over and over. Why did I do that? Why couldn't I just look away like everyone else? Regret, bitter and sharp, began to creep in. It's easy to be noble when you have a safety net. When you're falling, nobility feels a lot like stupidity. She felt foolish. She had sacrificed her future for a stranger who she would never see again. A stranger who vanished without a word. She eventually dragged herself home to her tiny, run-down apartment. The silence of the empty rooms amplified her despair. She curled up on her mattress, still wearing her work shoes, too exhausted to take them off. The darkness was absolute. She felt abandoned by the universe. She had passed a kindness test, but the prize was destitution. Meanwhile, Caleb was nowhere to be found. He didn't chase after her. He didn't appear with a magical solution right then. He simply disappeared into the city, a ghost in the wind. This absence was the cruelest part. No closure. No thank you. Just silence. It made the sacrifice feel even more hollow. Ava cried herself to sleep, believing her life was over. She didn't know that the gears of destiny were turning, slowly but surely. She didn't know that her actions had set off a chain reaction that was currently rippling through boardrooms and bank accounts. But for tonight, there was only pain. The night ended with Ava broken and Caleb gone. It was the lowest point of the story, the all-is-lost moment. The viewer is left wondering, was it worth it? Is kindness truly a weakness? The darkness before the dawn is always the deepest, and Ava was drowning in it. Weeks passed, and Ava's life spiraled downward with terrifying speed. The firing wasn't just a stumbling block, it was a landslide. Without a reference from her last job, and with a difficult label likely whispered between managers in the area, she struggled to find work. She picked up odd jobs cleaning, walking dogs, but it wasn't enough. The savings jar she kept for tuition was raided for rent, then for food, until it sat empty and mocking on her dresser. The dream of college, once a vivid reality, was now a fading memory, a ghost of a life she couldn't afford. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday, taped to her door like a scarlet letter. She had 48 hours to pay or vacate. Ava stared at the paper, feeling a numbness that was worse than the panic. She had nothing left to sell. She had nowhere to go. She sat on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by boxes of her meager belongings, and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her regret. I shouldn't have done it, she whispered to the empty room. I should have kicked him out. It was a horrible thought, a betrayal of her own heart, but survival instinct was screaming it. Her friends, the few she had, couldn't help. They were all struggling too. She was alone in the uncaring machinery of the city. The memory of Caleb had turned from a badge of honor into a source of bitterness. He was just a random guy. He probably didn't even remember her. She had thrown her life away for a moment of moral superiority, and now she was paying the price. It was a brutal lesson in the economics of kindness. Sometimes the good guys finish last, and then they get evicted. She spent the last day packing, her movements slow and robotic. She found an old brochure for the nursing program she wanted to join. She crumbled it up and threw it in the trash. It was too painful to look at. She was preparing to move into a shelter, to become one of the invisible people she used to serve. The irony was sickly sweet. She was about to join Caleb's world. The phone didn't ring. No miracle check arrived in the mail. The reality of poverty is that it is boring, slow, and grinding. It's not always dramatic often. It's just the quiet suffocation of options. Ava was suffocating. She sat by the window, watching the rain streak the glass, waiting for the landlord to come and change the locks. She felt foolish for ever believing in karma. The world was a cold, hard place, and she was just another casualty. She closed her eyes, wishing she could go back to that night and change everything, wishing she could be selfish, wishing she could be like Mr. Henderson. At least he had a job. At least he had a roof. But deep down, beneath the layers of fear and regret, a tiny spark remained. She knew, even in her despair, that she couldn't have been like him. It wasn't in her DNA. She was going down, but she had gone down fighting for what was right. It was a cold comfort, but it was the only thing she had left to hold on to as the sun began to set on her life as she knew it. The morning of the eviction, a gray and somber day, a sound pierced the quiet despair of Ava's street. It wasn't the rattling engine of the landlord's truck, but the smooth, deep purr of a high-performance engine. A sleek, black luxury sedan, polished to a mirror shine, rolled slowly down the cracked pavement, looking utterly out of place amidst the potholes and peeling paint of the neighborhood. It stopped directly in front of Ava's building. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, whispering. Who was this? Police? A debt collector? A drug dealer? Ava was dragging a box to the curb when she saw it. She froze, wiping sweat from her forehead with a dirty sleeve. She didn't know anyone who drove a car like that. The driver's door opened, and a chauffeur stepped out to open the rear passenger door. A man stepped out. He was wearing a tailored Italian suit that probably cost more than Ava's entire apartment building. He was clean-shaven, his hair perfectly styled, his posture commanding and confident. He radiated power and wealth, a millionaire in his element. Ava squinted. There was something familiar about the eyes, something about the way he stood. The man adjusted his cufflinks, looked up at the building, and then locked eyes with Ava. He smiled a warm, tentative smile that cracked the veneer of his corporate armor. Ava dropped the box she was holding. It hit the sidewalk with a thud. Her breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be. It was impossible. It was Caleb. The beard was gone. The grime was washed away. The hunch of the defeated was replaced by the stance of a leader. But the eyes, though sad, kind eyes, were exactly the same. Caleb Foster walked toward her, stepping over puddles with expensive leather shoes. He didn't look at the trash or the decay. He looked only at her. Hello, Ava, he said, his voice clear and strong, stripped of the raspy weakness of that night. Ava stood paralyzed, her brain unable to process the data. Caleb? She whispered, the name feeling strange on her tongue in this context. But you. She gestured vaguely to his clothes, the car, the reality crashing against her memories. I don't understand. I know, Caleb said gently, stopping a few feet away. I have a lot to explain, and I have a lot to make up for. He looked at the boxes on the curb. His expression darkened for a moment, a flash of pain crossing his face as he realized how close she was to the edge. I'm sorry I took so long, he said softly. It took time to set everything up, to do this right. He reached out a hand, not to shake hers, but to offer support. Leave the boxes, Ava. You won't be needing them here. The plot twist had arrived, parking itself on her curb. The homeless veteran was a phantom. The reality was standing before her, offering a hand up. Ava looked at his hand, then at his face. The fear began to recede, replaced by a dawning sense of wonder. The unbelievable was happening. Standing on the sidewalk, with the neighborhood watching, Caleb revealed the truth. He wasn't just a man down on his luck. He was the CEO of Foster Dynamics, a tech giant known for its innovation. But before the boardroom, he had been a soldier. He was a veteran who had seen combat, who had lost friends, and who had struggled with reintegration upon returning home. The experience had left scars that money couldn't heal, and it had given him a deep, abiding empathy for those left behind by society. "I go undercover once a year," Caleb explained, his voice low and intense, "to remind myself of what's real, to see how people treat the least among us when they think no one is watching." He told her about the social experiment. He wanted to find people who possessed true integrity, not the fake corporate kind, but the kind that cost something. He had been to 5 restaurants that night. He had been kicked out of all of them until he met Ava. "You were the only one," he said, looking at her with profound respect. "The only one who saw a human being. You risked your job, your money, your safety. You passed a test you didn't even know you were taking." Ava listened, tears streaming down her face again, but these were different tears. Tears of relief, of shock, of validation. She wasn't stupid. She wasn't a fool. She was seen. "I didn't do it for a reward," Ava sobbed quietly. I couldn't let you go hungry." "I know," Caleb replied. "That's exactly why you deserve the reward." He explained that he had spent the last few weeks arranging everything, dealing with lawyers, and preparing a surprise that required legal precision. He had vanished because he needed to return as Caleb the CEO, not Caleb the Wanderer, to fix the mess he had inadvertently caused. "I found out about the firing," he admitted, his voice hardening. "I have people who watched. I knew what Henderson did, and I knew about your situation." He gestured to the eviction notice peeking out of her bag. "I'm sorry you had to go through this darkness, Ava, but it ends today." He wasn't just a rich man playing games. He was a man searching for a soul connection in a soulless world, and he had found in a waitress with 40 to her name. The revelation reshaped the entire narrative of her suffering. It wasn't random cruelty. It was the prelude to a biblical level of redemption. "Come with me," Caleb said, opening the car door for her. "There's somewhere we need to go. One last stop before your new life begins." Ava hesitated for only a second. She looked at her rundown apartment building, the symbol of her struggle, and then at the open door of the car. She stepped in. The heavy door closed with a solid thunk, sealing out the noise of the street, and the car glided away, carrying her toward a destiny she had earned with a bowl of soup. The car ride was smooth and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaotic turn Ava's life had taken. They didn't drive to a mansion or a bank. They drove back to the scene of the crime. The car pulled up right in front of the diner. It was lunchtime, and the place was bustling. Ava felt a spike of anxiety. "Why are we here?" she asked, her voice tight. "I can't go in there." "Mr. Henderson." Caleb turned to her, a small, mischievous smile playing on his lips. "Mr. Henderson is exactly why we are here." He stepped out and offered her his arm. "Trust me." They walked through front doors, the bell chiming just as it had the night she left. The atmosphere changed instantly. The staff recognized Ava. Then they saw the man in the suit. It took a moment for the cognitive dissonance to resolve, for them to realize that the sharp-dressed tycoon was the bum from weeks ago. Whispers exploded across the room. Mr. Henderson came rushing over, his fake customer service smile plastered on, ready to greet a VIP. He didn't recognize Caleb at first. "Welcome, sir, welcome. Table for 2? Then he saw Ava. His smile faltered. "Collins, what are you doing here?" "I told you never to." Caleb stepped forward, blocking Henderson's view of Ava. "She's with me," he said, his voice cold as ice. Henderson looked at Caleb, really looked at him, and the color drained from his face as recognition dawned. It was the eyes. The nightmare of recognition. "You," Henderson stammered. "You're the vegan you kicked out?" Caleb finished for him. "Yes, and also the new owner of this building." The silence in the restaurant was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. "I bought the property this morning," Caleb announced, his voice projecting to the entire room. "And I bought the business." He turned to Henderson. "Which means, Mr. Henderson, that you now work for me." Henderson began to sweat, stammering apologies, trying to backtrack. "Sir, I I was just following policy. I didn't know. You didn't know I was rich? Caleb corrected him. That's the problem. You treat people based on what they can do for you, not who they are. Caleb reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. You're fired, he said, echoing Henderson's words from weeks ago. Get out, now. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated justice. The staff watched in awe. The patrons watched in shock. Henderson, stripped of his power, slumped away, defeated by his own arrogance. Caleb turned to the staff. Things are going to change around here, he announced. Kindness will be the new policy. Then he turned to Ava, who was standing there, hand over her mouth, tears of vindication in her eyes. But that's not the main reason we're here, he said softly. Caleb led Ava to the very same booth where they had met the reject table in the corner. But now it felt like a throne. He sat her down and sat across from her, mirroring their first encounter, but with the roles reversed. He was the one giving, she was the one receiving. He pulled a rectangular slip of paper from his inner pocket. It wasn't a menu. It was a check. I did some digging, Caleb said, sliding the paper across the table. I called the admissions office at the nursing school. I know about the tuition debt. I know about the holds on your account. Ava looked down at the check. The numbers swam before her eyes. It wasn't just enough for one semester. It was enough for the entire four-year degree, plus living expenses. It was a staggering sum. Caleb, she gasped, pushing the check back slightly. I can't take this. This is too much. I just bought you soup. You didn't just buy me soup. Ava, Caleb said, reaching out to gently cover her hand with his. You restored my faith. I was ready to give up on people. I really was. You saved me in a way. He pushed the check back toward her. This is an investment, not in a waitress, but in a future nurse who is going to change thousands of lives. The world needs you, Ava. Consider this a scholarship from the School of Hard Knocks. The emotions that had been dammed up for weeks of fear, the shame, the hopelessness broke the levees. Ava wept openly, a cleansing, powerful release. It was a tear-jerker climax everyone had been waiting for. The weight of poverty, which had sat on her chest for years, was lifted in an instant. She was free. She could study. She could live. The other waitresses, Sarah and Jessica, watched from the kitchen door, shame-faced and silent. They saw the check. They saw the man. They realized their mistake. Karma hadn't just struck Henderson, it had struck everyone, revealing the truth of their characters. Caleb handed her a pen. Sign it, he joked softly. Before I change my mind and buy a yacht instead. Ava laughed through her tears, a sound of pure joy. She took the check. It was real. The college tuition was paid. The struggle was over. As they walked out of the diner together, the sun was shining, cutting through the gray clouds that had hung over the city all week. Ava Collins wasn't just a waitress anymore, she was a student, a future healer, a woman with a future. And Caleb Foster wasn't just a tech mogul. He was a man who had found what he was looking for, proof that goodness still existed. Ava looked at Caleb. Thank you, she said, and the words felt inadequate, too small for the magnitude of the gift. You changed my life. Caleb shook his head. No, Ava, we changed each other's lives. He explained that he was going to turn the diner into a non-profit kitchen, a place where people could eat with dignity, regardless of their ability to pay. He wanted Ava to be on the board of directors, to help guide the mission. My kindness was my greatest asset, Ava realized aloud. It wasn't her speed, or her memory for orders, or her ability to tolerate rude customers. It was her heart. The one thing she thought had made her weak was actually her superpower. It was the only currency that mattered in the end. Caleb found his redemption not in writing a check, but in witnessing the transformation he could cause. He had used his power to correct an injustice, to balance the scales. The life-changing journey that began with a bowl of vegetable soup had ended with a new beginning for both of them. They stood on the sidewalk, the city bustling around them, but they were in their own world, a world where the rich man and the poor woman were equals, bound by a shared act of humanity. Ava clutched the check to her chest, not for the money, but for what it represented: hope. As Caleb walked to his car to drive her to her new life, the camera of our mind pulls back, showing the diner, the street, the city, a place that can be cold and cruel, yes, but also a place where miracles happen when you least expect them, where a simple test of character can lead to a destiny rewritten. Ava got in the car. The door closed, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Ava's journey proves one undeniable truth: integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching, even if it costs you everything. She thought she was losing 20, but she was actually investing in her destiny. In a world that often rewards greed, she proved that a pure heart is the only currency that never devalues. If you also believe that kindness is a superpower and that character counts more than a bank account, then you have found your home. Subscribe now and join a community that values the soul over the salary. Let's make goodness go viral. Now, let's make your voice heard. Like this video if you cheered when Mr. Henderson got fired. Let's see how many of us stand for justice. Comment below with your honest answer. If you were in Ava's shoes, down to your last dollar, would you have paid for Caleb's meal? Yes or no? And finally, share this story with someone who needs a reminder that hope is real. You might just be the bright spot in their day. And while you wipe those tears away, know that our channel is a treasure chest of emotional journeys just like this one. Explore our archives to uncover more stories of redemption and surprise. And to ensure you aren't left behind when the next roller coaster begins, turn on the notification bell right now. You won't want to miss the incredible story we have coming next.